Have you ever looked at an old photo of yourself and felt jealous of the woman in it? Not because she was younger or thinner or had better hair, but because of how alive she seemed. Maybe she was laughing, like really laughing in a way that looked like she had no idea anyone was watching. Maybe she was in the middle of something she cared about so deeply, a project, a trip, a conversation, something that was fully hers. Maybe her eyes looked lighter, like she hadn't yet learned how to carry whatever she carries now. Maybe she trusted herself, made decisions without checking them against someone else's reaction first. Maybe she just took up more space in a room in her own life. And you look at her and you think, what happened to her? Where did she go? Because somewhere along the way, you got quieter, smaller, more careful, more accommodating, more exhausted, more focused on everyone else, less focused on yourself. And the thing that nobody really talks about, the thing that I want to spend this whole episode on, is that most women don't lose themselves all at once. There's no single moment, no dramatic before and after, just a long, slow, invisible process of one tiny compromise at a time. Until one day, you look up and the woman in the mirror is someone you recognize, but just barely. This episode is for her, the one you've been missing, and the one that you are going to find your way back to. Hi, I'm Lisa, and this is the Pattern Breakers Collective, the podcast where we dig into the patterns that shaped us, the ones that nearly buried us, and the work of finally breaking free. Before we start, when I talk about unhealthy relationship dynamics, I'll use he for the person causing harm. That reflects my own experience and a lot of the women that I work with. But I recognize that the kind of self-loss that we're describing today can happen in any relationship, any dynamic, any life configuration. So if your story looks different from what I described, this episode is still yours. Today, I want to talk about something that I see constantly, not just in clients, not just in women leaving abusive relationships, in women everywhere. The experience of waking up one day and realizing, I don't even know who I am anymore. Maybe you can't remember the last time you did something just because you wanted to. Not because it helped someone, not because it was on the list, just because you wanted to. Maybe you've started a sentence with, well, I used to, so often that you've almost stopped noticing you're saying it. I used to love reading. I used to be really close with my friends. I used to know exactly what I wanted. Maybe someone asked you recently what you enjoy. Genuinely asked, wanting a real answer, and you opened your mouth and realized you weren't sure. You had plenty of answers about what everyone else in your life enjoys, but yours? Blank. If any of that landed in your chest right now, stay with me, because everything I'm about to say is for you. Nobody plans to disappear. And I'm going to start here because I think it's important. Not one woman reading or listening to this today walked into a relationship thinking, you know what I'd love? To disappear, to become the shadow version of myself, to lose my opinions, my confidence, my friendships, and the sense of who I am. That sounds great. Sign me up. Nobody does that. Women enter relationships because they are hopeful, because they want connection and partnership and love and belonging, because they believe in something, because they are bringing their whole selves to the table and expecting the same in return. The disappearing happens much later, and it happens so gradually, so quietly, so beneath the level of conscious decision-making that most women don't recognize it while it's occurring. Maybe the first thing that goes is your opinion. You stop bringing certain things up because every time you do, it turns into something exhausting. Not necessarily a screaming match, maybe just a mood, a withdrawal, a here we go again. And at some point, the calculation tips. The cost of saying it is higher than the cost of swallowing it, so you swallow it. Then maybe you stop wearing something, not because anyone forbade it, just because a comment was made once or twice, and then the comment lived in your head even when he'd forgot he'd said it. Then maybe you stop seeing a friend as often because the energy required to explain where you're going or the mood that follows you home or the vague sense that your closeness with her makes him uncomfortable just stops feeling worth it. Then maybe you stop pursuing something, a goal, a dream, a direction you had been quietly excited about, because everyone else's needs always seem more urgent, because the timing never feels right, because somewhere along the way you learned to put yourself last and called it responsible. None of those moments feel life-changing in isolation. Each one feels like a small, reasonable adjustment to the circumstances of your life. But stacked together, layered on top of each other over months and years, they become an entirely different life and a quietly different person living inside of it. You didn't disappear because you were weak. You disappeared because you were adaptive, because you were responsive, because you kept adjusting to what the environment required, and the environment kept requiring less and less of you. And I want to say one more thing about this before we go further. This is not only a story about abusive relationships, although it absolutely happens in those, and we will talk about that. It also happens in marriages that are not abusive in the traditional sense, in partnerships that are just emotionally unequal, in families where you became the caretaker so young that you never quite figured out how to be a person separate from the role, in friendships and careers that consumed everything, in motherhood, which can be the most invisible form of self-loss of all because it is so wrapped up in so much genuine love that you barely notice yourself disappearing into it. Whatever the context, the experience lands in the same place. You look up one day and the person you used to be feels so very far away. Now I want to get into something that is harder to say, because it goes beyond the normal ways life changes us and shrinks our worlds. In some relationships, especially controlling ones, emotionally abusive ones, or narcissistic ones, the shrinking isn't just allowed, it's useful, it's functional, it serves a purpose. Because the less space you take up, the easier you are to manage. The less confidence you have, the less likely you are to trust your own perception of what's happening. The less connected you are to yourself, to your instincts, your opinions, your desires, your sense of what's right, the more dependent you become on his version of reality. And I want to be very specific about how this actually works, because I think women imagine controlling relationships look like one person barking orders and the other person just silently obeying. And sometimes that is true, but more often it's so much subtler than that. It's not, don't wear that, it's, wow, you wearing that? Said with just enough of a look that you spend the next 10 minutes changing. It's not, stop talking to that friend. It's, oh, well, I thought we'd spend some time together tonight. Said with just enough sadness that canceling on her feels like the loving choice. It's not, well, your dreams are not important. It's, well, I just worry that might not be realistic for you. Said with just enough furrowed brow concern that you eventually stop mentioning it. It's not, your opinion doesn't matter. It's an eye roll, a long silence, here we go again, a way of responding to your perspective that makes you feel slightly ridiculous for having it until you start editing your opinions before they leave your mouth and eventually stop forming them about certain things altogether. Death by 1,000 paper cuts. That's the phrase. And it is exactly what it sounds like. No single cut is fatal, but together they bleed you dry. And here's the thing that I find most painful about this pattern, and I say this from my own experience, not just from professional observation. At a certain point, you stop being able to separate what you actually want from what you've learned is safe to want. You have been pre-editing yourself for so long that you genuinely cannot find the unedited version anymore. She's in there. But she's buried under so many layers of, is this okay? Will this cause something? Is this worth it? That accessing her feels like trying to find something in a room that has been packed up and sealed for years. That is not you failing. That is what sustained psychological pressure does to a person. The more that environment required you to be small, the more small became your automatic setting. Not because you chose it, because you survived it. Now, I have mentioned this several times, but here is something I think about a lot. The traits that make women most vulnerable to losing themselves: being accommodating, being nurturing, being patient, being willing to put others first, being flexible, being forgiving, being the person who holds things together. These are not weaknesses. They are genuinely beautiful qualities. And they are also the qualities that women get praised for constantly, that get called love, that get mistaken for strength, that get reinforced over and over again until they become not just behaviors, but identity. The woman who sacrifices everything is admired. The woman who holds her marriage together at great personal cost is called loyal. The woman who keeps smiling through exhaustion and overwhelm and emotional neglect is called strong. The woman who manages everyone's feelings while ignoring her own is called selfless. And selflessness gets treated like a virtue so routinely that questioning it starts to feel like a moral failure. Nobody sat us down when we were young and said, here's the difference between caring for people and abandoning yourself. Nobody taught us that generosity has a limit, and that limit is your own existence. Nobody told us that love was supposed to be reciprocal, not a river that flows entirely out of you while you stand there getting drier. So women go into relationships having been trained by their families, by their culture, by religion, by the media to believe that self-sacrifice is the price of being loved. And when the relationship confirms that belief, it feels like proof of something rather than a warning sign. Of course I should give more. Of course my needs should come second. Of course this is just what love requires. I've been told that my whole life. I remember the first time someone told me that my needs mattered just as much as anyone else's. Not more, not in a selfish way, just equally. And I genuinely didn't believe her. It felt like a nice thing to say. It didn't feel true at all. Because for most of my life, up to that point, every experience I'd had suggested the opposite. And that is not a character flaw, that is conditioning. And conditioning is not permanent, but you have to be able to see it before you can start to undo it. The women who lost themselves inside a relationship did not fail at love. They love exactly the way that they are taught. The problem is that they were taught that at all. There is usually a moment, not a dramatic one, not a scene, not a confrontation or a crisis or something that you can point to later and say, that is when everything changed. It is usually much quieter than that. Maybe it's a conversation with a friend you haven't seen in a long time. And you're talking and she's asking about you, not about your kids, not about your marriage, not about how you're managing everything, about you. And you start to answer and realize that you don't actually know what to say. Not because nothing is happening, because you have become so accustomed to not being the subject of any conversation, including your own internal ones, that being asked feels almost startling. Maybe it's a podcast episode or a therapy session where your therapist asks you something that simple. What do you enjoy? Or what do you actually want? And you feel the blankness where the answer should be. Maybe it's a moment in the car. Just you, the road, a song that was yours once, one that you loved before everything got complicated, and something in your chest does something unexpected. Not grief exactly, more like recognition, like, oh, I forgot this was mine. Maybe it's looking at your daughter and thinking, I would never want this for her. And then sitting very still with the weight of that thought. Maybe it's your child asking you, Mom, What's your favorite thing? And you not being able to answer without thinking about what you're allowed to want. These moments are quiet, but they matter enormously because they are the moment where something in you goes, wait. And once that something speaks up, it is very hard to unhear it. Now, here is something that I want to say carefully because I think it is both important and hard. When that moment comes, when the clarity arrives, it can feel devastating before it feels freeing. Because suddenly, you are not just dealing with whatever was hard about your relationship or your life, you're dealing with grief, real grief for the years, for the version of yourself who was there and got quieter and quieter, for the things that you set aside, for the person that you could have been, might have been if the conditions had been different. That grief is real and it deserves to be named, not bypassed, not rushed through, not replaced immediately with action plans and positive affirmations. You are allowed to sit in the grief of having lost yourself for a while because you actually lost something. And pretending you didn't makes the path back harder, not easier. The clarity that hits you like a wave is not a problem arriving. It is the truth surfacing. And the truth, even when it hurts, is always the beginning of something better. And I want to take a minute and just be in this with you. Because one of the loneliest parts about this experience is the feeling that nobody quite gets it. That from the outside, your life looks fine or complicated but manageable. And the internal experience of quietly disappearing in it has no language and no audience. So I want to share some of the things that women have said to me in the comments, in messages, in sessions, in the most honest moments. Things like, I used to be confident. I used to walk into rooms without rehearsing everything that I was going to say first. Things like, I used to be ambitious. I had plans, real ones. I believed I was capable of things. I'm not sure when I stopped believing that. Things like, I used to be fun. My friends used to look forward to seeing me. Now I cancel more than I show up because it's just easier. Things like, I used to have dreams that had nothing to do with anyone else. I can barely remember what they were. Things like, I don't know who I am outside of being a wife and mother, and I don't know if there's anything left to find. Things like, I met a version of myself in an old journal last year and I cried for an hour. She was so sure of herself and I miss her so much. Things like, I keep waiting to feel like myself again and I'm starting to wonder if that's even possible. Things like, my daughter asked me what my favorite color was and I realized I don't know anymore. I used to have an opinion about everything. Things like, I laughed the other day, like really laughed at something stupid, and my husband looked at me like I was a stranger. And I thought, maybe I am. And things like, the hardest part isn't the relationship. The hardest part is that I don't know which parts of me are real and which parts I performed for so long that they became automatic. If you heard yourself in any of those, I need you to hear this. You are not alone. Not even a little. The room is full, packed full. And the fact that you can hear yourself in those words, the fact that recognition lands somewhere real in your body when you hear them, that is not a sign that you are broken. That is a sign that you are still in there, still present enough to recognize yourself, still aware enough to grieve what got lost. That matters. That is everything. She is not gone. She has been buried under survival, and buried things can be uncovered. That distinction between gone and buried is the most important thing that I want you to carry from this episode. Okay, let's talk about coming back, because I think that this is where a lot of the conversations go wrong. They describe the problem beautifully and then offer solutions that feel either impossibly large or impossibly vague. Quit everything, start over, leave, rebuild, find yourself. And women listen and think, but that's not where I am. I can't blow up my life. I have kids and a mortgage and a complicated situation and 15 things that need to happen before Tuesday. That advice is not for me. So let me tell you what coming back actually looks like in real life for real women right now, wherever you are. As always, it starts with noticing. Before you change anything, before you make any decisions, before you do anything at all, you just start noticing. You pay attention to the moments you disappear from yourself. When do you edit yourself before you speak? When do you swallow something instead of saying it? When do you make a choice based entirely on what someone else will think or feel? When do you catch yourself monitoring the emotional temperature of a room instead of checking in with your own? Just notice. Write it down if you need to. You don't have to do anything with it yet, but noticing is how the automatic becomes conscious. And conscious things can be changed in a way that automatic things can't. Then you start with something small, something that is entirely and unambiguously yours. And I mean small. Not a life overhaul, something tiny. Maybe you order what you actually want at dinner tonight. Not the thing that seems easiest, not the thing that no one will comment on, what you actually want. Maybe you put on a song that used to be yours, not background music for someone else, yours. The one that reminds you of a version of yourself that you miss. And you let yourself feel whatever comes up. Maybe you text the friend that you've been meaning to text for 3 months. Not a group chat, her specifically. I miss you, can we talk soon? 4 words, that's it. Maybe you go for a walk without telling anyone where you're going or explaining how long it'll be. Just go. Feel what it's like to move through the world on your own terms for 20 minutes. Maybe you take a class in something that you used to love or always wanted to try. Not because it's productive, not because it fits the schedule perfectly, just because you want to. Or maybe you let yourself have a preference in a moment where you would usually defer. Someone asks you what you want to watch, what you want for dinner, where you want to go. And instead of saying, oh, I don't mind, whatever you want, you actually answer with something that's true to you. And then the next part of that is then you start practicing saying true things out loud. Things like, I don't agree. Said quietly without a 10-minute preamble, just, I don't agree. Or, actually, that doesn't work for me, without apologizing for having a limit. Or say, I need some time to think about that, instead of immediately yesing your way into something that will cost you. Or, I don't want to, said as a complete sentence, not, I don't want to because of reasons A, B, and C, and here's a detailed explanation of my thinking. Just, I don't want to. These are not dramatic acts. They are tiny, but every single one of them reconnects you to yourself. Every one of them sends a signal to you, not to anyone else, that says, I exist here. My experience is real. My preferences are allowed. And then there is the deeper work, the stuff beneath the surface, the beliefs that you carry about what you deserve, the automatic responses that run before you have time to choose, the patterns of relating that form so early you've mistaken them for personality. Oh, I'm just not someone who needs a lot, or I've been the one who takes care of everyone, or I just don't want to make things harder. These are not character traits, they are adaptations, things that you learn to say about yourself to make sense of why you keep choosing everyone else. And unlearning them requires more than a walk and a good song. It requires support, it requires consistency, and it requires someone walking alongside you through the process. And that is the work that we do inside the 12-week Pattern Breakers Collective program. Not just understanding these patterns, but actually practically at the level of daily behavior and nervous system response, changing them. If that's where you are, you can find all the details on my socials or at patternbreakerscollective.com. Reach out, ask questions. There is no pressure, just an open door. Coming back to yourself is not one big moment. It is 100 small ones. It is deciding over and over to be present in your own life. And each time you choose that, each tiny, unwitnessed moment of choosing yourself, something in you remembers who you are. I want to be honest with you about something because I think not saying it would be a disservice. When you start reconnecting with yourself, when you start making choices that center your own experience, and when you start saying true things out loud, when you start taking up a little more space, not everyone in your life is going to love it, especially the people who have benefited from your smallness. You may hear that you've changed, said like an accusation, like change is a betrayal rather than a sign of growth. You may feel guilt, deep, specific, well-practiced guilt, because you have spent years making yourself responsible for other people's emotional comfort. And opting out of that is briefly going to feel like you're doing something wrong. You're not, but it will feel that way. You may face pushback, confusion, people who genuinely don't understand what's happening because they knew a version of you that never pushed back, never said no, never needed anything, never expressed anything inconvenient. And this new version is disorienting to them. And I want to say something about that. The discomfort is not a sign that you are doing something wrong. It is a sign that the pattern is being interrupted. And patterns that have been running for years do not get interrupted without creating some turbulence. That turbulence is not the destination. It is the passage between where you were and where you are going. You are supposed to change. That is the whole point of doing this work. You are supposed to become someone who takes up space, who has opinions, who says true things, who has needs that she expects to have considered. And if that costs you certain dynamics, certain relationships, certain versions of connections that were built entirely on your self-erasure, that is not a loss. That is clarity about what was actually there. The relationships that can hold the full version of you, those are the ones worth your energy. And you will not find them while you are still pretending to be half of yourself. Change is not a betrayal of people who loved the smaller version of you. It is a commitment to the person you actually are. And you deserve to be fully known, not just the parts that were safe to show. I want to close today by going back to where we started. That old photo, that woman who looked so alive, who laughed without rehearsing it, who took up space without apologizing for it, who seemed to know herself in a way that feels far away from where you are right now. I want to say something about her. She is not a lost cause. She is not someone you grew out of or outgrew or left behind permanently. She is not gone. She went quiet because the environment required it. She made herself small because that is what the situation seemed to demand. She set herself aside because she thought she was supposed to, because she was taught that she was supposed to, because the love she wanted seemed to require it. But she is still in there. You can feel her in the moments where you laugh and then catch yourself and then laugh anyway. In the moments where you have an opinion so strong it surprises you. In the moments where a song plays and something in your chest responds before your brain has time to manage it. In the moments where you look at your daughter or your sister or a woman you love and you know with complete certainty that she deserves more than what you've been accepting for yourself. And then you sit with the slow, quiet recognition that you deserve it too. You are not the woman you were 10 years ago, and you don't need to be. Growth changes us. Motherhood changes us. Life changes us. That is not the problem. The only problem, is when you have become a version of yourself that exists primarily to keep everyone else okay. When there is nothing left in you that is purely, unapologetically, simply yours. You deserve to come home to yourself, not because you've earned it, not because the circumstances are perfect, not because you've suffered enough or tried hard enough or gotten everything in order first, just because you are a person and people deserve to exist fully, including you, especially you. I know some of you are in situations that are complicated, where coming back to yourself is not simple. And there are real barriers, real fears, real reasons why the path forward is unclear. And I see you. This is not simple, and it does not have to be simple to begin. You don't have to have a plan. You don't have to have an answer. You just have to be willing to take one small step toward yourself today. Order the thing that you want. Put on the song. Text the friend. Say the true thing. Let yourself want something. Start there and trust that the woman that you've been missing will meet you halfway. If this episode meant something to you, please share it, not just with the people already in this community, with the woman in your life who is in the middle of this and doesn't have words for it yet. The one who keeps saying she's fine and clearly isn't. The one who looks a little less like herself than she used to. She might need to hear this today. And if you haven't left a review yet, wherever you listen, please take 60 seconds and do that. It is one of the most direct ways to help more women find this space. And there are so many women who need to know that they are not alone in this room. Until next time, keep breaking every pattern that taught you that shrinking was the price of being loved. You were never, ever supposed to pay that price.